Fábián, and this is my colleague Márton Matyasovszky-Németh. We've already introduced ourselves in the morning to those who attended our panel before lunch. So before really diving into Eastern Europe, I want to ask you all a few questions. And these are a few scenarios which philosophers love to make. Scenario A is a very simple one. You're driving in a city, there's traffic all around you, you arrive at a red light at a crossing, and you see cars coming from the road perpendicular to yours, so you probably wouldn't make it through the intersection without hitting someone unless you're extremely well timing your crossing. How many of you would stop at that red light? Okay. And how many of you would continue driving through the red light? One very, very risk-taking individual. Okay. Then let's complicate this scenario a bit further, as we do. You're driving in a city, as you did before. You arrive at a red light at a crossing. You see no cars crossing from the other direction, but there is a police car behind you. How many of you would cross the intersection? One very anti-authority colleague in the audience. Okay, and most of you, I would imagine, wouldn't cross. Okay.
Is this in Bronx or Budapest?
For you, it's in Bronx, so. But it's a good question. We'll get to that. So scenario C, the next one, and we are getting more and more complicated as philosophers often do. You're driving in the city, red light, whatever, no cars crossing from the other direction, no police car around you this time, but a child is sitting next to you and you just had the red light talk with them, which is, don't cross when the light is red, you don't want to cross, and so you'd pretty much undermine your whole argument that you've made to them before about not crossing red lights. How many of you would hit the gas and go through anyways? And how many of you wouldn't? Most of you, okay. Then let me get to my last scenario and I'll leave you with this. Let's send it to that. You're driving in a desert now. You arrive at a red light at a crossing. For some reason, there's a crossing in the desert, and you see no cars crossing from that direction, and you're absolutely sure, and you're not mistaken. You can see far away. The weather is clear, it's beautiful. There's no police car around you, no surveillance whatsoever. You're absolutely certain of this. And let's add the stipulation that you will not become less prone to future law-abiding conduct by breaking the law this time. So if you cross now, you will still be a law-abiding citizen and you will not become some sort of anarchist, reckless driver in the future. How many of you would still stop at the red light? And how many of you would speed through? Okay, I see a roughly 50-50 split if I'm being generous. With some abstentions. So this is what we philosophers like to call the problem of normativity. How do we know how we should act, or rather philosophers really say how one ought to act in a given situation? Now the standard answer to this is, well, you act according to reasons. You have a reason to stop at a red light, you probably have a reason to go through the red light because you want to get somewhere. You have a reason to eat dessert, you have also a reason not to eat dessert if you're watching your calories or whatnot, or you're diabetic. You have a reason to swerve your car if someone steps in front of you, you have a reason to listen to your favorite song on the radio, etc. These reasons are usually called explanatory reasons. So if someone asks you, well, why did you do what you did? You would say, well, I did it for A, B, C, and D reasons. Why did you come to CUSEC, to this lecture? You're interested in this topic, or you if you're here, you might as well. There's, I don't know, some coffee and treats on the ground floor, so you might as well enjoy the lecture with us. So those are explanatory reasons. But philosophers, and legal philosophers especially, talk about normative reasons a lot, which is what you ought to have done. So you might say, well, I stayed in bed all morning because I was, I don't know, feeling tired, not really feeling up to it. But then, you know, your boss might have called and said, well, where are you? And then you would say that, well, I ought to have come into work, I ought to have done something. You might not have, but that's the split between explanatory and normative reasons. Normative reasons are also called justificatory reasons. So where can reasons come from? Well, they come from a lot of places. One of the places which is rather self-explanatory is prudence. If you stopped at the red light in the first scenario, just to remind you, that's when the cars are crossing from the other directions. That's probably a prudential reason. You don't really want to get hit by another car. You want to avoid pain. You want to gain pleasure. To be really simple about it. That's prudential reasons. The other thing, the other phenomenon which usually counts as reason giving and thus normative is morality. You have a reason not to torture anyone and not to kill anyone under standard circumstances. But what about law? How much can law give us reasons for actions? To rephrase that in a more everyday sense, when do we obey the law? You saw in the scenarios that most of the times you obeyed what the law said, stop at the red light. But in some scenarios you didn't. Maybe you were an outlier and you weighed your reasons differently, but maybe you really thought that you shouldn't really stop at the red light in the desert. So that presents us with a problem about law's normativity, and that's where legal culture can be injected into this conversation. Legal culture is something a bit different. If you think about cultural norms in terms of law abiding and rule following, you would think that, well, in some countries you do this, and in other countries you do that. In some countries you really, as a pedestrian, stop at all red lights. For example, the Germans are known to do this. That's the standard example. If you go over to Austria, just over the border, they will probably be a bit more law-abiding than us in Hungary. So that's legal culture. There's a very famous author called Lawrence Friedman, whom Márton will talk about a bit more. But Friedman basically says that legal culture is the values and attitudes relating to law will determine when and why and where people turn to law or government or turn away from it. So basically, how do you use law, when do you obey what the law says, etc. There's two types of legal culture according to Friedman. There's internal legal culture, which is the culture of lawyers, how lawyers think about these sort of issues. I don't know how many of you are lawyers, but probably not too many of you other than us, maybe a few outliers. So we'd probably be more interested in external legal culture, that is the legal culture of everyday people. And these cultures are historically and geographically variable. And that means that if we think about legal culture, we can think about a Central European legal culture. And to understand what that is, we need to first understand what is Central Europe.
Yeah, but before we start thinking about Central Europe, I don't want to be we don't want to be too ethnocentric, so we'd like to ask you a very simple question. How would you, if you can just use one word, how would you label your legal culture, your national legal culture? You're not lawyers, so you're going to give fun answers to these questions. So, how does your legal culture look like at your home country or your home region? Please, hands up in the air, because I'm a lecturer and I'll give the microphone to everybody.
I don't think we should pass out the microphone. Just give your answer and I'll repeat to the interpreters.
Barbaric.
Barbaric is one answer from Márton. Abby from Serbia.
There are no,
I would differentiate between Western and Eastern one, and I would say ours is like an in-between.
Okay, so there's Western and Eastern legal culture, and the Hungarian one is somewhere in between.
the historian colleague read János Szűcs, who wrote a lot about the in-betweenness of Central Europe.
Yeah.
But we have many participants from all over the world, so please get out with those labels. Yeah.
Corrupt.
Which country?
So corrupt from Bosnia. Okay. Purposeful in the United States or in Nyíregyháza.
Or in New York State?
Yeah, in New York State.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Opportunistic in Spain.
Opportunistic in Spain. Okay. Interesting.
Actually, it wasn't to say opportunistic.
From which country?
Also Bosnia.
Also Bosnia. Okay.
Because it's based on opportunity.
Uh-huh.
You have opportunity to break the law without getting caught. That's how.
Okay, so you try to skim the law and not get caught.
Anyone who knows that they will not get punished will definitely break the law.
Okay, so if you don't know you won't get punished, you will break the law. Which reminds us of our scenario B, where there was a policeman behind you. And that's one of the big questions about law and how you obey law, and that's what we're going to talk about with sanctions and coercion.
Yeah, or whatnot. Okay, so we can safely say that we are now in Central Europe, which is a unique place, an in-between place, a semi-periphery, if we paraphrase Immanuel Wallerstein, a place between Western and Eastern culture. A place between Western and Eastern European legal culture. And we really like to use this term, Central Europe, and we really like to use it as a collective term where Germany, Austria, and all the other former Yugoslavian Eastern European countries are involved. Although I doubt that I doubt that most of the Germans or the Austrians would join us in the club. Austrians cannot do anything because they joined the club with the Habsburg Empire, so they are part of Mitteleuropa. And the term Mitteleuropa was coined by actually a German historian. Yeah, thank you. So, what do you think? What does Central Europe means today, this day? Does it include Germany? If it includes Germany, does it include the whole country? No. Then if it includes some parts, which parts? DDR, the former DDR regions. Okay. Does it include Austria? I answered this question. I think it's probably safe to say that Austria somehow created Central Europe, or the Habsburgs created Central Europe. Okay, Central Europe. Central Europe. Does it mean only the Visegrad 4, or does it mean the Western Balkan? Who are for only the Visegrad 4? Slovakia, Czechia, Hungary, Poland, Austria and Croatia. Visegrad 4 plus. Slovenia, yeah. Who would put the Western Balkan countries into this group? I mean, Serbia, Bosnia, Macedonia, North Macedonia, Bulgaria. Nobody.
Including the people from there.
Some years ago, I was in a research group when we put all of these Western Balkan countries into this into this collective term Central Europe, and we had debates for like 2 weeks. How do we phrase Central Europe, Central and Southeastern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe? Great debate. That's why it took 2 years to finish the book. Okay, Central European legal culture. Brother, would you like to? Okay. These are terms which I made some research, and so what does Central European legal culture mean? What are the symptoms of Central European legal culture? And I found these three expressions or three little features which are really common in common legal culture studies. So distrust of the authorities. I can see that from this point, it's not just Central European, but also Central and Southeastern European. Nation state is a necessary lie. So it means, I brought this from a Czech scholar, that Central Europe was always multi-ethnic, and we then invented the term of nation state, and we created national laws. That's an interesting thing. And the inferiority complex, which brings another feature into making. Okay. Inferiority complex, why? What are the effects on the law of Central Europe? You know the history of Central Europe. It's a bit fragmented. Turks come and go, Habsburgs come and go, Soviets come and go, and it's nearly impossible of Central Eastern European countries to have the so-called organic growth in their legal systems and social systems. So that's why we focus constantly on development. And it brings the result, the instrumentalization of law, which means that we try to solve every social problems with lawmaking. It brings constant copying and adopting from Western solutions. So maybe many of you are familiar with the regime change in your countries, when constitutional courts and lawmakers adopted Western phrases, Western legal instruments, and tried to adapt it in their unique national or regional cultural field. That's what we call instrumentalization of law. But what is the result? Lawmaking detached from social reality. I think that's a common feeling for us in this room, that somehow lawmaking is detached from social reality. Opportunistic, barbaric, what else? Opportunistic, So we have a common feeling here with lawmaking. Then problems of rule following, enforceability. You are, I could see with your answers to Áron that you are a pretty rule following group of people. Not many of you would go through the red light. But it seems that because of the detachment, the feeling of detachment, there are problems with rule following and enforceability. So, and another funny feature: the rise of symbolic and technical rules, long preambles to constitutions, long parliamentary declarations of national independence and national whatnots, and lots of technical and bureaucratic laws. Okay, do you want to say something? No? Okay. Was there a question? Okay. Okay, what are the possible ways out? We have to break with our overconfidence in regulation. We cannot solve societal problems with lawmaking only. Law is part of our culture. We tend to claim our rights. That's a common feature here in East Central Europe or Central and Southeastern Europe. But what if we focus on slower and more gradual measures that rely less on coercion? What? We would see in a happier and nicer time. And thank you for your attention. And we would wait for questions.
Invite you for a brief Q&A.
Yeah.
If you have any.
Originally, we were told that we are going to present to a group of Hungarian high school students from Jurisic High School and other Kőszeg high schools. So we try to plan a playful and active workshop, and it then turned out that high schoolers are not interested in legal culture.
You are absolute battlement.
On a Thursday late afternoon. So you're the victims of this, but we would very much talk to you about legal culture, about normativity, and many other fun parts. If you have questions. It was a long week. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't know who was the first.
We were at the same time. It's not typically legal culture. Okay. Yeah, just passing the mic. It is not just legal culture, but how legal culture interferes with politics in our region and in the different countries or outside of our region.
We'll collect questions and.
I just wanted to ask you, there was recently I heard a criticism from a Serbian philosopher who said that the specific phrase rule of law is too Western, and why would we in the Balkans, because I'm from Serbia, by the way I said barbaric, not meaning of course here Hungary, but Serbia, which is my
You could have.
No, I totally disagree. So, what do you think about this? Is it just some kind of a right-wing narrative? Or do you think it makes sense with this kind of concept of rule of law? Where does it originate from? That's basically my question.
Anybody else?
Let's answer these questions. Will you start with law and politics?
Yeah, I'll let you talk about law and politics because you know more about it. I'll happily answer Ivan's question about the rule of law. And that's you can get into the history of the term. It's a dual thing. The rule of law is an English thing, and Rechtsstaat is a German origin, but it partly comes back to the issues we were discussing in the morning about what standards, who makes the standards, how do we actually enforce those standards. Now, some of the values of rule of law, for example, don't, if you make a law, try not to do it retroactively. So tomorrow, if you are, if someone says that actually attending a lecture on legal culture in COSAG from the 1st of January is a crime punishable by prison, you'd obviously say that's not okay. And that somehow intuitively feels not okay. And that's part of rule of law in a very formal sense. So there's some actually very interesting research being done on this by experimental philosophers doing these sort of thought experiments in different cultures. And the feeling is, in most places, according to empirical results, is that it is kind of law, but it's flawed law. So we kind of seem to have a shared intuitive understanding of there being some standards that you kind of want to follow with rulemaking. So in that sort of term, rule of law might imply some universal standards, but that's the philosopher talking from me. On the other side of the coin, I come back to something that we discussed or we mentioned or briefly touched upon yesterday with a sort of debate on how to frame AI, for example. So I would reframe your question partly in terms of, well, is it useful for us to focus on rule of law? Is it useful for us to focus on rule of law as a concept when you try to get to some results? Or should you rather focus on something else? And if you focus on rule of law, how do you apply that term? So that's what philosophers often call nowadays conceptual engineering, conceptual ethics. How do you improve the concepts that we are using? So that's my very theoretical answer to your question. Hopefully I've elucidated it, and I give my microphone to Márton.
Law and politics.
Yeah.
I remember when we entered law school, the first lectures were about why law is different from politics, and analyzing and talking about law is nothing to do with politics. It can have interferences, but we won't talk about politics. That was my first constitutional law lecture, and I think it's a global feature, but you can feel that there is something wrong about this this point of view, because law is made by politicians. Lawmakers are usually politicians. Of course, those who write the actual letters of law are clerks or counselors in ministries or nowadays in law firms, but lawmakers are politicians. And it became a research topic in the 20th century, the relationship of law and politics. The starting point was somewhere in the early 20th century, when sociology of law invented. One American founders, one of the founders was American, Roscoe Pound. He famously phrased that there are law in books and law in action, and he wanted to focus his research on law in action, and he somehow established a school which was which was a very heterogeneous school, legal realists who said lots of things about for example, about the relationship of law and politics. And the other founder of legal sociology was the Austrian Eugen Ehrlich, who lived in, who graduated in University of Vienna, then went to Bukovina and worked there as a lawyer. And
Bukovina is in today's Ukraine.
yeah, in Ukraine and Romania.
Yeah.
The southern part is in Romania, and he worked as a lawyer in the capital of Bukovina and taught there at the legal academy. And he was the first one, or we found he was the first who said that there is social reality of law. He didn't do much research on the interference of politics and law, but they are the founders of the so-called critical scholars of the 70s in America, who read Pound, read Ehrlich, read the legal realists, then read some Marx in this, and Lukács and other neo-Marxist Gramsci in the 60s, and some of them said law is politics. And of course, the mainstream view is that we have to differentiate, and we have to, because law is a field. It's a very practical endeavor. Also, it has connections with politics, and social science has to do research into this topic. Other questions? Yeah. 3 questions.
So, hello again. My question is like, in what ways can a digital diplomacy with its potential for real-time communication and translational collaboration be strategically employed to navigate the complex political, legal, and historical landscape of Eastern Europe, Central Europe? Thank you.
Question.
Complex question.
One of the, I would rather highlight the challenge, if that's okay. Is this turned on or? No.
No, you should, yeah.
Okay. So,
Yeah, go
so, okay, anyways, I want to highlight a challenge with using AI in legal applications, especially in those sort of sensitive and culturally, politically fraught situations. Is as lawyers, terminology and use of words and language is a very sort of important and crucial part of any process. And AI might help us with that, with translating back and forth documents and enabling cooperation in that sense. But it also presents a danger if it, for example, if it ignores the sort of cultural aspects of this process that we try to highlight in this presentation. So, I mean, AI as a tool, if it's trained properly and used properly, then it might help us in this sort of regard. If it's just, you know, if it's an American model trained on American data, which doesn't understand the cultural specificities, then that might present some problems, but I'm not an expert on this topic.
No, my question wasn't about artificial intelligence, it was about digital diplomacy.
Could you elaborate what tools you mean exactly?
I mean, it's a form of diplomacy, but in like internet platforms, for internet platforms.
So you would use online platforms to do diplomatic work? Or?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think the same sort of challenges that come about with this sort of international diplomatic work, especially if it results in some sort of law making, especially in binding instruments, is is obviously still present if you're using digital tools and online platforms, so you would still need to navigate those sort of issues. It would enable more participation maybe in the process if that's what you're interested in, and understanding how, and if we come back to this idea of slower, more gradual measures that actually take into account culture, that might be helped by using digital tools and involving more participants in this sort of process. I might not be making any sense to you because I'm not an expert on this issue, but catch us after this session and we can discuss this in a moment. Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So something about the concept of Central Europe. So I think this is a highly political concept. So because when it came into fashion, so in the 70s, early 80s, following the very influential piece by Such, it had a very important political function. It would be very, very difficult to support the argument of Such only on the basis of scholarly. He didn't know Russian language literature. Basically, he is based on German, with respect to German literature, and I was teaching this essay to various students from various parts of Europe, and many of them highly criticized it. But it had a very important function because the message was that Europe shouldn't be divided into two parts, Western and Eastern. This is not the long-standing tradition, which had a long, also it's a dangerous school, that along the River Rhine there is a borderline and there is a different development in the east of the River Rhine and the west. And he questioned this, and that had a very, very important political role and was teaching a lesson. The other remark is that I think what you said about whatever Central Europe is, that it is trying to follow Western patterns, it is changing. It doesn't want, I think now, whatever we mean by now Central Europe, it's just the opposite. The Central European politicians, be it before or they are challenging now the Western examples. This is exactly now the message that we do not want to follow Western patterns, we do not want to accept their rules, we have our own traditions and we want to follow our traditions. When I went to university, this was the big issue. We kept talking about underdevelopment and backwardness and things like that, and no, obviously not. The real light comes from the East now, so it's, we should learn much more from the East. The West is now in decline, it is going down. We should shift our attention towards the East. So I think this is, and about the rule of law, I think we have to clarify what types of laws, because there are codified laws, and sometimes codified laws are in a major contradiction with moral laws. And of course, when we talk about rule of law, this is generally the codified laws, but sometimes it is very, I think the Serbian politician is right. So sometimes the rule of law has to be challenged. If we never challenge the rule of law, there would be no change. So it has to be, so it is, it should be accepted at face value what rule of law is, because I think that especially younger people who are at the beginning of their careers have to keep in mind that they do not have to respect everything at face value, because then they are unable to initiate change. You have to think about that, you have to question this, and especially the contradiction between moral laws and codified, politically determined laws. That is something that you have to keep in mind.
About Central Europe, when we started the presentation and I looked at you, Professor Pok and Professor Matyasovszky, I became worried because you and of course Tamás Székely, the three of you are historians and know much more about the history of the terms Mittel-Europa. And recently I just read a book about Péter Hanák, who was a renowned scholar, the founder of the CEU history department, who was deeply in love with the term Central Europe and Habsburg Empire. And I saw both of you in the interviewees in that book, and that's why I became worried. But your comment, Professor Polk, brought me an interesting idea that somehow legal scholars, social legal scholars, found the term East Central Europe or Central and Eastern Europe in the last 10 years. There are many conferences in the last decade, I would say. There are legal and social theorists associations. We are in one of the biggest one, and we really everybody thinks about the legal features, the legal culture of Central and Eastern Europe. And I already mentioned that I was in a research group, an international research group, which wrote about the features of about Central and Eastern European legal culture. And the funny part was that when the book was published, and a year later, one of the editors, one of the heads of the research group, Alexandra Mercescu from Sorbonne, she's originally from Romania, came to our department and made a presentation, and she showed the book and she said, "Oh, and that's a nice example of post-colonial thinking about law in Central and Eastern Europe." And I sat there and I was like, was I post-colonial? I wouldn't think so. I think that's gibberish. But now you can publish this kind of thinking, and it seems that they are indicated. It's a good book, I think, but it's nothing with post-colonialism. It has some nostalgia towards the good old time, the Fincycle. Okay, the other things, the adaptation of Eastern political dialogue. It's again funny that, for example, our Hungarian politicians often refer to the West or to the East as an example. Although, while you mentioned this, I started to smile because there is an ongoing process which is aimed to save our national sovereignty. And what they did was that what they are doing now is that they asked one of the comparative legal institutions called Model Ferenc Comparative Legal Institutions, and they copied Magnitsky Act, the USA Magnitsky Act. So they adopted a Western law. They will make it Hungarian law in recent weeks, but they tend to the East. It's a funny contradiction, I would say. And the rule of law question, you're the rule of law expert.
Yeah, I'd rather just get a few more questions in and maybe touch on the rule of law.
Just two other ways to think about the law. So one, I observed in many countries there are pre-application and post-application law countries. So pre-application is when in Germany you get fined immediately after you start going on the red light. Post-application is when you get convicted after you made an accident going through a red light. So you can do it, and as long as there is no trouble, nobody will bother you. That's the post-application. You know? The other way to distinguish between East and West is everything is prohibited unless it is specifically allowed, or everything is allowed unless it is specifically prohibited. It's a very different thinking.
You're right.
And that's why culture matters. And that's why culture matters in these sort of things.
And this is where a group of social scientists asked me at UCLCIS once upon a time that, then what do you mean on culture? And I was like, screw you. What do you mean on culture? And then the other question was, what do you mean on society?
Why?
Why
culture?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The mic is somewhere there.
Oh, yeah, here. Sorry.
Thank you. I'm not a lawyer. I'm.
Thankfully.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, so I have a rather philosophical remark or question. I don't know exactly.
He's a philosopher.
That's nice. And it's about the connection between law and political trust. Because I think that democracies are based on political trust, and authoritarian regimes less. But if we think of the best constitutions in democratic countries, they are based on political mistrust, aren't they?
Which constitutions again?
I mean, if you take constitutions, democratic constitutions, they reflect political mistrust, and therefore they are so good, and they are protecting human rights, etc.
Yeah.
Because they are based on this political mistrust. Do you agree with this or not? It's just like philosophical question.
There's I don't know if you know, however, there's a great reading of Montesquieu, who originally thought about this sort of constitutional arrangements. Judith Sklar famously called it a liberalism of fear, because it builds upon that mistrust in society. It builds upon mutually this sort of idea of checks and balances comes from mistrust. You don't trust those in power, and you want to put checks and balances on that. So I would refer you, I think, to that. And that's a big strand of thought that appears in Western liberal, in political philosophical sense, constitution making and law making, and but there's also other. If you look at political philosophy, there's sort of more Rousseauan way of thinking about it. Is obviously building more on everyone trying to agree and come together under the sort of same ideas and getting everyone herding everyone together. It's a big issue in political philosophy, so I can't really go into it. But about and to connect it to rule of law and legal culture, these sort of things have to be taken into account when you're trying to design a constitution, a legal system. You need to count upon how much trust there is in a society, if you want to foster more trust in a society, and these are instruments that might help us with that, and there might be instrumental reasons to do that.
And Montesquieu was among the first who connected these dots. So nothing new under the sun. Yeah, this is only very good.
And running out of time.
Yeah. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you all, and if you have any further questions, feel free to catch us, but we have to get going because interpretation is done. Okay. Thanks so much.